The Guardians of the Globe were Earth's greatest superhero team. Then, Omni-Man killed them all in episode 1, and the show spent 4 seasons figuring out what came next. Here is every Guardian, ranked from footnote to the character the show has been building towards since the beginning. Let's break this down. Shrinking Ray. She nearly died, and then she mostly stopped. Shrinking Ray joined the new Guardians of the Globe as part of Cecil Stedman's reconstruction of Earth's superhero infrastructure after Omni-Man dismantled the original roster, and her size manipulation ability, the capacity to reduce her physical mass to near microscopic scale and return to full size, which she used in combat as both an infiltration tool and a finishing technique, made her a genuinely useful addition to a team that was learning collectively what its capabilities were. The Lizard League attack on the Wyoming military base was the event that defined what Shrinking Ray's arc in the show would look like. She used her power to enter Salamander's body and expand from the inside, killing the Lizard League member through a technique as brutal as anything the show had depicted at that point. She then tried the same approach on Komodo Dragon, who compressed her before she could complete the expansion, and she barely survived the extraction. The show depicted her trauma as real and sustained rather than episodic. She did not recover by the next mission, and she did not resolve it through a pivotal battle. She eventually stepped back from active duty, which the show presented as a legitimate response to what she had experienced rather than a failure of will. Shrinking Ray's arc in Invincible was the show being honest about what proximity to that level of violence actually does to someone who is not built to be invulnerable, Shapesmith. He knocked out an astronaut and took his place on Earth. And when the Guardians found out, they decided to keep him. Shapesmith was introduced in Season 1 as a Martian who had arrived on Earth with a specific motivation. He had watched the Guardians of the Globe in action and wanted to be a superhero in a way that the Martian civilization's relationship to individual heroism did not allow for at home. And the simplest available path to that goal was impersonating an astronaut named Roose Livingston and integrating himself into human society. The astronaut he replaced was subsequently taken over by Sequids, which meant Shapesmith's deception was indirectly responsible for the Sequid threat gaining its first human form host and the leverage it needed to operate on Earth. His shapeshifting capability made him one of the more tactically flexible members of the expanded Guardians roster. He could replicate any physical form he encountered, which gave the team options for infiltration, distraction, and direct combat that relied on different principles than the standard strength and durability toolkit most of the team operated with. His confession to Black Samson about his true identity, which he framed as a necessary disclosure before a dangerous mission, landed with diminished impact when Black Samson revealed that he had already known, that the Guardians had known when they recruited him, and that the confession Shapesmith had psyched himself up to deliver was simply something the team had already processed and moved past. He was the show's most entertainingly conceived recurring hero whose significance the narrative never fully matched. Bulletproof. He was the most physically imposing member of the new Guardians, and the show gave him the least to work with. Bulletproof's ability to absorb kinetic energy, converting the force of incoming attacks into additional strength and durability rather than damage, made him the team's single most durable active combatant after the Immortal, and his combination of flight, super strength, and the kinetic absorption mechanic produced a fighter who improved in a fight as the fight escalated, which was the opposite of what most of the team experienced under sustained pressure. Xandil Randolph joined the expanded Guardians roster in Season 2 and was present for the Invincible War, the Sequid confrontation, and the continued operations the show documented through Seasons 3 and 4. The challenge the show created for itself by including Bulletproof is the one it has not yet resolved. A character whose power set was clearly documented and whose personality communicated genuine warmth and commitment, who consistently showed up and contributed to the team's operations, but who had not yet received the specific story investment that would elevate him from the functional role he occupied. He was the hero who was always present and always useful. The show's relationship with useful but underdeveloped characters has historically been to save the significant story, for the moment the character's specific capability or situation becomes essential to a plot the narrative has been building toward. Whether that moment has arrived for Bulletproof is the question his Season 4 presence was positioned to answer. Black Samson. He lost his powers and built a suit around the absence, and then Battle Beast beat him badly enough in Season 1 that whatever was blocking the original powers apparently stopped working. Black Samson was the only member of the original Guardians of the Globe to survive Omni-Man's massacre, specifically because he was no longer an active member when the massacre occurred. A power loss of undocumented origin had removed him from the team before Nolan's betrayal, which meant the exit that the show framed initially as a professional setback was the only reason he was alive when the season ended. He rejoined the new Guardians using a technological suit that replicated a version of his previous capabilities, rather than relying on the biological power source he had lost, and his presence on the team during the Battle Beast confrontation produced the event that restored him. The injuries he sustained were severe enough that when he recovered, the original powers had returned, which the show presented without a clinical explanation as something the trauma of near death had unlocked rather than triggered. His seniority among the new roster, the sole surviving member of the team that had preceded every other current member, gave him an institutional credibility that the show used through his relationship to the team's operations rather than through a developed personal arc. Black Samson functioned as the connective tissue between what the Guardians had been before Omni-Man and what they were becoming afterward. Dupli-Kate. She could clone herself indefinitely, the original Kate, and every clone operating simultaneously as extensions of the same consciousness, able to flood a combat space with versions of herself that each fought with her full capability. And the show weaponized that specific power against her in the Lizard League attack on the Wyoming military base by having Komodo Dragon kill enough of her clones simultaneously that the original Kate appeared to have died in the chaos. The Immortal's grief response to this apparent death, and the subsequent revelation that the original Kate had survived while he was mourning at his mountain cabin, and the relationship that developed between them in the aftermath, produced the show's most unexpectedly sweet secondary arc, two characters whose defining characteristic was persistence across extreme circumstances, finding something worth persisting for in each other. Dupli-Kate's cloning ability was the show's most explicitly documented example of a power with social implications beyond combat. The question of which Kate was the original and whether that distinction mattered to the clones who existed alongside her was never resolved because the show treated her individual wholeness as a given, rather than a philosophical problem. Her retirement alongside the Immortal following the Invincible War represented the show acknowledging that some characters had earned the exit that shrinking ray reached through trauma while they reached the same destination through completion. The Immortal. He was Abraham Lincoln. This detail was delivered in Season 1 with the specific comic timing of a show that understood exactly how much genuine narrative weight it could extract from the Immortal's millennia of accumulated historical presence, and the answer was enough to make the detail land as both funny and genuinely significant without committing more screen time to it than the information required. The Immortal was the de facto leader of the original Guardians of the Globe, the member whose indestructibility made him the team's most reliable operational anchor and whose thousands of years of existence made every other member's lifespan look like a brief introduction. Omni-Man decapitated him in the first episode and he came back. Omni-Man killed him again and he came back again. The show uses resurrections to establish that the Immortal's specific version of mortality operated at a different threshold than the standard parameters, and then used his relationship with Dupli-Kate to establish that even someone who had been alive for millennia could find something new in the specific person they chose. His grief at her apparent death, his sabbatical at the mountain cabin, and the scene of finding her waiting there functioned as the show's most compressed love story. Everything required to make the reunion land was present, and nothing extraneous was included. His post-war retirement was the first time the franchise allowed itself to let a character who could not permanently die choose something other than continued fighting. Monster Girl. Every transformation made her younger, and she was already 26. The curse that Amanda carried, the reversal mechanic that caused her body to regress physically each time she shifted into her monster form, a side effect of the event that gave her the power in the first place, meant that the woman who was fighting at the level of a heavyweight combatant was visually presenting as a child due to accumulated transformation time, and the show used the gap between her actual self and her apparent age to create a specific kind of social friction around a character who knew exactly who she was and encountered people who consistently misread that. Rudy's project to cure the curse was the clearest external signal of his feelings toward her before he revealed his human form. He dedicated significant research and resources to solving a problem that was entirely hers without being asked, while maintaining the robotic presentation that concealed what the effort revealed about him. The revelation of how he had cloned his new body from Rex Splode's DNA without asking Rex, as a decision made unilaterally based on a perceived preference Amanda had expressed, complicated the relationship's foundation in a way the show documented through Amanda's explicit acknowledgement that she needed time to process what had been done in her name. The belt that suppressed the regression allowed her to transform at will without losing herself physically. What she retained was the question of what it meant that the person who had given her that freedom had built himself into the shape of someone she had found interesting. Rex Splode. He started as someone the show wanted you to dislike. The Rex Splode introduced in Season 1 was arrogant, impulsive, dismissive of teammates he found beneath his attention, and actively cheating on Adam Eve with Dupli-Kate, which the show established early enough that his introduction was functionally a series of reasons not to be invested in his continued presence. Jason Mantzoukas' performance made him entertaining despite all of this, which was the foundation the show needed to build the character development that followed across 3 seasons and made his death in Season 3 land with a weight that his Season 1 presence had not earned, but his subsequent choices had. Rex matured. Not completely, not consistently, but genuinely. The impulsive hero who had prioritized his own self-image over his teammates' safety became the team member who pulled younger heroes back from mistakes he recognized because he had made them himself. His near-death from King Lizard's gunshot at the end of Season 2 was the show's clearest signal that his trajectory had shifted from comic foil to someone the narrative was investing in. His death in Season 3 was the sacrifice of a character whose arc had concluded in the most meaningful possible direction, not through redemption in the conventional sense, but through the slow accumulation of choices that added up to a person worth grieving. Robot renaming himself Rex at the funeral was the show's acknowledgement that the person who had given him his body had become someone worth carrying forward. The original Guardians. They died in the first episode, and the show built its entire emotional architecture on the weight of their absence. War Woman, Darkwing, Red Rush, Aquarius, Martian Man, Green Ghost. 6 heroes whose combined capability and institutional significance made them the most important protective force on the planet, assembled in the subterranean meeting room beneath the Utah facility by a false distress call from the one person who knew the access protocols, and gone before most of the audience had fully registered who each of them was. The show gave them approximately 15 minutes of presence before Omni-Man killed them, which was precisely enough time to establish that they were people with distinct voices and capabilities and relationships to each other. Red Rush's speed and his European self-consciousness about American heroics, Martian Man's warmth, War Woman's authority, Darkwing's competence, before removing them all simultaneously. The design of that sequence was the show's opening thesis statement about what kind of superhero story it was going to be. Not one where the deaths were reversible through narrative convenience, not one where the people who existed to be killed were established as disposable, but one where the deaths of characters you had just met could generate genuine grief by virtue of what was visible in 15 minutes about who they had been. The original Guardians of the Globe died so that every subsequent character's survival could feel provisional in a way that most superhero stories never allow their cast to feel. Robot/Rudy Connors. He was never a robot. The show revealed this in Season 1 with the specific patience of a narrative that had been building toward it since the first episode. Rudy Connors, a man whose body was so physiologically incompatible with normal air that he had lived his entire life inside a containment pod, had built himself a remote-controlled robotic suit, called himself Robot, led the teen team, and subsequently led the new Guardians of the Globe without anyone knowing that the intelligence directing the metal body was a human being who had never experienced the physical world in any form that did not mediate it through technology. His plan to transfer his consciousness into a cloned body built from Rex Splode's DNA, executed through the Mahler twins, completed across Season 1 and 2, revealed to the team in the context of already existing as Rudy in Rex's body, was the show's most elaborate long-game character reveal, a secret that recontextualized every decision he had made as the deliberate architecture of someone who had calculated the path to existing differently for years before executing it. The relationship with Monster Girl was genuine. The use of Rex's genetics without consent was a violation the show documented without resolving. His leadership of the Guardians through seasons 2 and 3 was the period in which the seeds of the comic arc were being planted. The man who had spent his whole life building ways around the constraints placed on him by circumstance, learning that the same intelligence that had built him out of a pod could build him towards something the show is still determining the shape of.